Ciao Ciao everyone. How is everyone doing? So we are back this time with another episode. The last time around we recorded an episode on the Maldini dynasty and it was a great one. It was a great time reminiscing some legends like Cesare, Paolo and a future prospect like Daniel. This time around we are back with a different episode. Everyone has requested us to do this, a video on the Superga disaster, a video on the Il Grande Torino team, a legendary team that achieved a lot of great things, but at times it gets forgotten. The magnitude of what they did gets forgotten in the modern era. And with me joined, I have with me today Ajay Bhai and Kaustubh, who of course know their history very well, especially Kaustubh, who has written multiple articles on the Superga disaster and on the Il Grande Torino team. So Kaustubh, how are you doing? First things first.
Good, good. It's like very good to speak about something, about a topic which deserves a lot of attention because it probably had a lot of, you know, bigger impacts on Italian sport, Italian culture, and, the very essence of, I guess, Torino as well. So, yeah,
Hmm.
really good to speak about it finally because it
Hmm.
deserved a lot of attention a while back,
Yeah.
doesn't really get mainstream attention. So I
Yeah.
guess this is probably our attempt to give it some more attention than it does.
I agree. I agree with you. Ajay Bhai is also, of course, I'm sure you have read about it a lot. You've followed this topic a lot. What does it feel like in general to know that, this topic, even to date, like at times isn't covered enough and probably should be getting more attention than it does, because when we dive into this topic today, even when I was doing my own research, there's so many things that you learn. There's so many
बिल्कुल
fine details. So what do you think of it?
सबसे पहले थैंक्स सो मच परम फॉर द इंट्रो एंड Costume is looking like Rolando Bianchi today, so very happy that we're recording.
Yeah.
एंड मैं अपने व्यूअर्स और लिसनर्स को एक ही चीज कहना चाहता हूँ कि ये एपिसोड में ज्यादा
Hmm.
अंग्रेजी होगी बिकॉज द टॉपिक इज सच कि यहाँ पे इंग्लिश में ही हमको
Yeah.
ज्यादा बात करना पड़ेगा, बट इन बिटवीन हम लोग हिंदी में भी चिप इन करेंगे, सो वो एक डिस्क्लेमर था. एंड
Hmm.
कमिंग टू योर क्वेश्चन, आई थिंक दैट इज द रीजन व्हाई वी स्टार्टेड कैल्चो चर्चा, बिकॉज बहुत सारे जो हमारे लिसनर्स फ्रेंड्स हैं आर जस्ट they've just started to watch football, or
Yeah.
they are not aware of this chapter in history, and which is exactly why we are here bringing this topic to all of you. And it is a topic that, as Kostov rightly said, it deserves a lot more attention to it, because the nature of it, I mean,
Hmm.
we've never seen a team like this, ये issue के बाद में we've never seen a
Hmm.
team like this. And of course Torino itself, probably for younger listeners, they know Turin, Juventus, but they
Yeah.
must be not knowing about Torino, which is why we are doing what we are doing. So
Hmm.
looking forward to having this chat with both of you.
Yeah, I agree, and of course, even I wanted to bring this to everyone's attention. कि हाँ, today's video will be primarily in English. हम लोग हिंदी में भी बात करेंगे, but as Ajay bhai said, there's so many things to talk of, and we want to cover as much of our audience as we can. So this will primarily be in English. We know that you see it in our comments. We have a Torino fan as well, so for him as well, for other Torino fans who watch, maybe we want to do it justice. And one more thing I would request before we get this started, when this video premieres, please be respectful in the comments. This is a sensitive topic. This is a topic regarding a disaster, so try to
Yeah.
keep the comments contextual to the video. Please do not bring in comments that are not relevant to the topic. With all due respect, we can take those comments in some other video, in some other live stream. So please keep your questions or whatever you want to say as respectful possible and to the point as possible. So with further ado, let's get started, Ajay bhai. Of course, a bit of background about Torino FC, where you and me can chip in before we go to Costo. Club founded in 1906, with different reasons, break away from Juventus. Of course, a few disgruntled people at the top who were not happy or were ousted from Juventus started Torino. And of course, Ajay bhai, आप तो nickname जानते हो, it's Il Toro, Granata, based in Turin, of course. And just to know, Ajay bhai, just from your perspective, in the context of modern day, do you still think the club holds well when we get before we get delve into everything in terms of what they've done? Where do you think the club stands in general?
Look, obviously वो अपने पुराने glory days में तो नहीं है, but when I
Hmm.
started watching SerieA,
Hmm.
उस समय में Torino were not part of the league. They were in Serie
Hmm.
B, And when I started reading about the history of Calcio, history of the Italian league in general, okay. As an opponent, Torino have really smashed Roma back in the day, but you want Torino to be part of SerieA from the larger picture of things, given their rich history. So of course, Urbano Cairo, जो president है Torino का, is a controversial figure to say the least. But at least after a while, because आप देखोगे, if you just go back a few years ago, a decade maybe, they were yo-yoing between Serie B and Serie A.
Yes.
But after
Yes.
many years now, they've found stability in Serie A, at least where they're not getting relegated, and they're in the top 10. 10th position is Torino's, which is quite refreshing, because for a while, as I said, they were
Yeah.
yo-yoing. And of
Yeah.
course, you saw a great amount of players like Rosinaldo, Rosina, who was there. What a mercurial player. And then
Yeah.
years later, Andrea Bellotti also coming,
Yeah.
sort of like becoming quite a big name at Torino. So, and Torino also made it to the Europa League, if I'm not mistaken, a few
Yes.
years back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Matteo Darmian was also there. So
Yeah.
I'm happy that they're back. Obviously, वो Sete Sorole, Seven Sisters में अब तक आए नहीं है. They're not part of the top
Yeah.
half of the table. But to be honest, if under Vanoli, and if they have the correct investment, that day is not very far away where they're back
Yeah.
in Europe and consistently make it into at least the Europa League, if not the Conference League. So I'm happy, but I think Torino still have a long way to go before they
Yeah.
get back to their glory days.
I agree with you, and as you can see, it's quite a historic club. Like most number of Serie A titles after Juve, Inter, AC Milan, and Genoa at 7. 5 Coppa Italia titles more than AC Milan. Of course, maroon is their traditional color, and as Ajay bhai said, they actually have reached a UEFA Cup final in 91-92, where they beat Real Madrid on their way, and they lost to Ajax on away goals. I wish that was not a thing. I wish there was a better tiebreaker to decide it. As you can see, the crest, it's a rampant bull, traditional symbol of the city of Turin. अगर आपने Juventus का third kit भी देखा होगा, I mean, I know it's a zebra of sorts, but it's more of that rampant sort of logo as well. And you can see that's how they got their nickname, Il Toro. That's how it has been derived. So obviously, Juventus उनकी rivals है, which we've established, and the derby is known as the Derby della Mole. So I think this is just to establish Torino for the people who are new, or just to get things started. Ajay, we can move on. We can get to Costo. Obviously, I just wanted to show this photo once before we get things started. Again, this is the Il Grande Torino team of 46-47, where they broke a lot of records. A classic jersey as well. Jerseys back in the day, Ajay, quite different, but very, very simple and amazing to. I wish stuff like this was made more often, right, in the present day. You're on mute, Ajay. You're on mute. Yeah, I think you're on mute, but yeah, I think what.
Yeah, I was saying it's so iconic that you would buy it now, and I think clubs should make an effort to kind of restock classic club jerseys here like this for sure.
Yeah.
And like fairly
So,
recently, Torino actually donned that jersey as well during a recent game where they paid tribute to what we'll
Yes.
talk about.
yes,
We'll
we will be. Yeah,
come to
I
that.
have that as well. I have that. Yeah, we'll come to that. So moving on, Ajay, if we could just go to the next slide. I think we get started right from Il Grande Torino. This is where Costo comes in. Costo, Ferruccio Novo was their president. Yeah, he kickstarted everything, and uske pehle, of course, Erbstein. We will talk about him. Erno agree. Erbstein. Usne the thing they had done in the 38-39 season was that ये लोग second finish हुए Serie A में, right like behind Bologna, who won the Serie A at that time. And Ferruccio Novo was a Torino fan, was a former Torino player actually, Ajay, as a kid, and he said he was quite, I think he called himself like a quite naive player or something back in the day. But he comes in as the president, Costo. He's not a full-fledged fan. He does not go crazy with the money or everything, but he's a proper administrator as well. He listens to everyone. Your 2 cents on what we have mentioned in the PPT, like wherein he listens to legendary. Sorry, Ajay, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. So even just for context, Vittorio Pozzo was the Italian coach who won 2 World Cups, 1934, 1938.
Yes.
So just wanted to add that as well.
Absolutely, thank you for doing that, because he listened to Vittorio Pozzo, as Ajay bhai said, 2-time World Cup winner, and Vittorio Pozzo told him, follow the English model, hire competent people around you. He hires tons
Yeah.
of people. I've mentioned a few names like Antonio Gianni, who was a World Cup champion, as Ajay Bhai said, and people with shrewd business acumen. There was also a person by the name of Roberto Copernicus, whose image I
Yeah.
could not find at all on the internet. So again, I don't have an image, but a very, he owned a clothing business, so he hired smart people. He hired, obviously Costo will mention this. He, I think, spoke to Bill Lievesley. He hired Leslie Lievesley, his father. Again, smart people, Kostub. So your 2 cents on how Ferruccio Novo approached this, how he laid the foundations for Il Grande Torino.
I think a lot of, as you already laid down the foundation, he was keen on bringing in a lot of people and making sure through that Torino had a very solid foundation and structure, which was fairly revolutionary, because we're talking about a time where football was very different from how it is today, where you where it was football clubs were clubs. They were not your companies like they are today, where every player knew pretty much every person on his street. Where even someone like Ferruccio Novo knew a lot of people who lived around him. They were like a general part of the public as well. And um, a lot of times ideas like these don't really go down well, but this one worked really well, because as a key appointment, he brought in Abu Epstein, who recommended a lot of players to them, and a lot of
Yes.
players, which we will come to, were
We will
not
come.
really doing well in their
Uh,
careers
yeah.
before they actually joined Torino.
Hmm.
And he was a key appointment. We will come to his story later on, but it was almost as if no one really expected that. Obviously, Torino had won the title during the 1920s, but this was them setting up for something completely different, because it was going to be generational. And if you have a structure in place which is different from
Hmm.
how it is for other clubs,
Hmm.
you are looking at a bigger picture, not at a smaller picture. So
Yeah.
it was probably clear, even despite the early doubts, that he was trying to do something bigger than what the others were trying.
I agree. I agree.
And
And
as we
to,
mentioned, a lot of
yeah,
players didn't really do well before
yeah,
they
before they join.
came to Torino.
Yeah. So, but
So
as
yeah,
you said,
we will
to
come
your
to
point.
a lot of other names later on.
Yeah, we will be coming to the names. I'll also come to Ajay Bhai in a second. As you can see, he also hired other competent people like Mario Sperone, who was again a World Cup winner. Again, this was the initial year, Ajay Bhai, of their foundation. अगर आप देख सकते हो, a lot of their players were a backbone of the Italian national team. We'll come to this stat later. I don't want to say it now, but it's crazy how important they were back in the day. And this basically laid the foundation of an 8-year cycle. Sure, they must have won 5 titles, but the dominance, the period where they did well, including 2 wars in between, was 8 years. And
Hmm.
they obviously, equaled the record of the Quinquennio d'Oro, which is like the 5-year golden period of sorts, which was set by UA. And they had one Coppa Italia as well, one a trophy. But Ajay, how, just to get your 2 cents, how stark of a difference is this? Because we see Torino in the modern day, the fans are unhappy with Urbano Cairo, and then you had a proper passionate fan owner like Ferruccio Novo, who had a very balanced sense, in his mind, ki, हाँ, I'm a fan, but I also need to do realistic things. But also, he made such smart decisions. He consulted the right people, which is the total opposite of what Urbano Cairo is.
I think see वही modern day football थोड़ा और complicated हो चुका है. And
Yeah,
to be fair, I think back in the day what Ferruccio Novo did was also kind of revolutionary.
yeah,
Kind of like going against a standard Italian way, where because there is a certain stubbornness in Italians, because it is my way or the highway generally with most club presidents. So I'm
Hmm.
sure that back in the day, हम लोग तो उस समय पे थे नहीं, we don't know, but I'm sure that Ferruccio Novo would have been considered to be a little
Yeah,
outside the box of a thinker, to
yeah,
kind of like do things differently and actually get success from it.
yeah,
So Italian football में अगर आप देखोगे, I think the reason why all of us watch Italian football and support Italian football is that there are a lot of mavericks who come in, disrupt
yeah.
things and do things a certain way. Be it
Hmm.
Arrigo Sacchi, be it Marcello Lippi, be it of course Don Fabio Capello, Ancelotti in the later years. So Italian football is full of these stories, and I think
Mm.
at this point of time, even Torino probably couldn't have imagined that what they're going to achieve, on the
Yeah,
pitch, the kind of
yeah.
dominance. So really, really amazing to hear, man.
Amazing, amazing. I agree with you. And the first thing he did was, again, as I said, competent people. He didn't hesitate from looking abroad. Leslie Lievesley ka jo main naam bola, we will be looking at him. Or no, I agree. Upseen, whom we mentioned, was the coach before Novo Kevin, but he had to flee eventually because of the racial laws set by Mussolini back in the day, and
Yeah,
him being
yeah,
of Jewish origin. But moving on, he also just signed. We will be looking at this player later. A player called Franco Osola, who was a very young player. As Kostub said, he signed a lot of these unknown players, Ajay, like young players, bet on them, and they ended up doing very well. We'll get into all this. So just remember the names, photos hai sabke end mein. We will be showing it. Franco Osola is who I was talking about. So we can move on, Ajay, into the next slide. Uh, so yeah, at this point, Kostub, एक tactical before this actually. 1940-41 season I think was all right for them. We move on from the 1930 and 40. Again, this was the base year, right, Ajay? So 40-41 season, I think they finished seventh in the league. But again, when you're building something, it takes time, right, Ajay? When you're building something good, it does not happen always. It does not instantly happen all the time. So it took them time. I think the biggest positive for them in that season was Franco Osola, who I mentioned, ended up scoring like 14 goals, which was a breakthrough season for him. As Costo mentioned, unknown talents doing well. And they moved on. They lost some of their older players, but they kept on bringing in new players. And if I'm not wrong, Kosto, he brought in like five players in this season, or was it the season after he brought in five players? If you could correct me. From he
I'm
signed
not
players
sure.
from. Yeah, I will check that. We will get back to that. But yeah, the point was he started building something. And Kosto, we come to this tactical revolution back in the day, which was started by legendary Arsenal coach Herbert Chapman, the WM system. We won't get into the depth of tactics, of course, but what happened was, you could enlighten us. Torino adopted this, and they it was recommended by the staff. Ajay bhai, he brought in, Roberto Copernicus, Elena, all these players recommended ki हाँ तू WM tactic adopt कर. It's the trending thing. Make it dominant in Italy. No one has does it. Fiorentina was trying it but was unsuccessful. So he does this, and Costo
Hmm.
enlighten us here. He brings in this tactic. They sign relevant players, and it gives them a sense of balance. And Vittorio Pozzo, as Ajay bhai said, he adopts this and forms the
Hmm.
Torino block. Ajay bhai, we hear
Hmm.
in the modern day people, Spalletti talking about the Inter block. That's how Pozzo adopted the Torino block back in the day. So Costo, adopt this, enlighten us on this and tell us how they finished second just to Roma here. Of course, Roma's first Scudetto. Ajay bhai would know about it. So
first
enlighten us.
first of many many Scudetti that we won.
Yeah. But yeah,
So,
enlighten us, Costo, please. Go ahead.
so a lot of it has roots in Hungary.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the 1930s, the WM formation had actually taken root there. Um,
Hmm.
Obviously, the origins of formations can't really be traced back to one person all the time. It's obviously, I mean, what happened in a lot of cases when it comes to tactical evolutions is that a lot of English people migrated. And obviously, Torino were founded by an English person as well. And Torino were originally a cricket club. I mean, when they were with Juventus, just like Milan and Genoa. And this WM shape was very prevalent in Hungary amongst Hungarian managers. And Abu Epstein came in the 30s with that reputation as someone who can bring about something different in Italy. And again, obviously, Hungarian managers, the presentation mentions Andras Kutik was manager, again, someone who's Hungarian. And again, just to put it out there, that the tactical background of this era was that um, there was this insistence on, I mean, this insistence was rising where teams were slowly trying to play more on the ball football instead of the more English way, which 1950s may we saw that that iconic Scotland win over England, which was like a historical watershed moment. So yeah, this made Torino a very modern day side, and obviously, as I mentioned, Hungary was a big part of it. Um, and if you consider how this was right around the war, a lot of players knew at this point that the world war is right around the corner. They knew कि हाँ कुछ होने वाला है. And sitting here, we probably can't really imagine all of that because firstly we're not players, and secondly we live in much more secure times in a global sense. It throws a lot of things into uncertainty. Say someone like Valentino Mazzola,
Yeah, we will.
he a lot of these players had a background in serving the army or helping out in the World War in some way. Even
We will.
Novo himself, even
Yes, we
Novo
will
himself
come to that.
was.
We will come to that because actually I've kept it for a bit later. But एक
हाँ,
चीज तूने अजय भाई just look at this tactical level. Look at the names first of all. Of course, from the modern context, we only know about reading. Obviously, we weren't back alive or we haven't watched anything of this. But let me put some context into it, right? I asked you, Costo, which season they signed, players from Juventus. So in the lead up to the 41-42 season, which Roma won, they took three players from Juve. Felice Borel, Gabetto, who ended up being one of the greatest players in the time and one of Torino's best players, actually even better than what he did at Juve, and Alfredo Bodoira, and they snatched two players from under Juve's noses. That's where Torino was, Ajay. By nowadays, it's the other way around. You have Juventus taking
Mm.
Gleison Bremer, their best defender. Just imagine how different times were, Ajay bhai, back in the day.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल बिल्कुल.
Yeah,
I mean, they were the I would say the at that point of time the number one team in the city of Turin. So
hmm,
they firmly kind of were in the ascendancy. Ki ha bhai,
hmm,
Torino is of Turin and Juve are the B team of Turin. So
yeah,
different times altogether. Can't even
yeah,
imagine that in the modern day scenario. But yeah, as you rightly mentioned, such legendary names. Unfortunately, obviously, we've not watched them play. It's just
yeah,
that through articles that we've read, and of
yeah,
course, Mazzola is the most famous surname,
yeah,
which obviously you as an Inter fan would know. In the
yeah.
future, his son eventually became a
My
legend for
son,
Inter.
who would have thought that dynasty would? I mean, we spoke of the Maldini dynasty, but this dynasty
Correct,
maybe we
correct,
need to cover as well. But again, they were taking big players left, right, center before we move on. I think they also signed Romeo Menti on the right, of course, who ended up being a great player as well. So again, a World Cup player, like top players everywhere, and they came very close. Ajay bhai, they just finished behind Roma. And the basis, this was before they adopted the WM tactic, and they just kept getting stronger from here. We can move on to the next slide and talk a bit more about that. In general, how they took over after Roma won the Scudetto. Uh, yeah. So, of course, Costo, this is where the dominance starts because in the 41-42 season itself, if I'm not wrong, what happened was कि basically जब Roma Scudetto जीती, the thing that cost them, sorry, the two players that cost them both played for Venezia, Valentino Mazzola, as Ajay bhai said, and Ezio Loic. And 3 game weeks before the Serie A ended, that is when they beat Torino and Roma ended up winning. And also they knocked Torino Venezia out of the Coppa Italia in the first round Torino played. So Venezia was like their arch rivals of sorts.
Hmm.
And then Ajay bhai Ferruccio Novo, after the game against Venezia in the league, not the Coppa Italia, right? In the league, he straight away goes to the dressing room and he signs Mazzola and Loic there and then. Different times we live in.
Such a WWE time. I can just imagine Costo. We are
Yeah.
Vince McMahon going to WCW and signing two players. कल से तू WWF में आ जा, E में आ जा.
Yeah,
Those were the
exactly.
times.
That such you brought up the right comparison. Like just going there, you are playing for Torino now, done there
This
and
is
then.
like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall heading to WCW. बिना बताए.
हाँ, it's
Yeah,
the other way around. Yeah.
yeah, and just to put it into context, I think Mazzola was more of a playmaker from what I have read, and of course, Loic was more of a fast winger costume. And again, these two were like the cherry on the cake because they completed the team. That was it. Matlab, team is done now. We have a team of superstars costume everywhere from goalkeeper to the defense to midfield. We saw the formation which was to be built and the attack. And what happens? They were both of these were already key players for Italy, as Ajay has mentioned, the World Cup team. They built a top squad, as I said. They what happened is, but Costo enlighten us. They were supposed to have a like a cakewalk to winning the Serie A, but actually league बहुत difficult पड़ गया because surprisingly Livorno came out of nowhere and challenged them up until the last day of the season. And this is where their Hungarian manager, who was hired, was let go halfway through. Andras Kutic, he was let go halfway through the season, and Antonio Gianni, who was hired as one of the advisors, if I'm not wrong, was made the coach. But they ended up winning the Scudetto. Valentino Mazzola, जो अजय भाई ने बोला, ends up becoming the star man. And in this season, they get their revenge, Ajay bhai, over Venezia by beating Venezia in the Coppa Italia final, absolutely destroying them. And they do the first again. This is not noted well. They become the first club to do the double, the first Italian club to do the double. Enlighten us on this, Kostub, just what it meant at the time.
So, this is, as I mentioned, war is a very uncertain period.
Yeah.
And especially beyond the war, if I talk about, as we mentioned at the end of it, that World War II intensifies and SerieA halts and the entirety of football stopped.
Hmm.
Um, and and Italy obviously didn't do really well in the war
Hmm.
with their
Yeah.
Axis and the Allied powers, the whole story. Italy didn't
Yeah.
really do well, and a lot of times it was seen as an embarrassment in
Hmm.
Italy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and for Italy, football's been a huge part of their identity. To be very, very, very frank, almost like Argentina, as Argentina are now during the World Cup when that Argentina won. You can see how much it means to them because it is the only thing they can cling on to in times of
Yeah.
so much inflation and whatnot. So if you look at the context that when Italy historically, if you look at all those Western countries, be it Germany, Britain, France, and all these countries, not Portugal, someone like Spain, Italy attained independence fairly later. And Italy is
Yeah.
not your usual, was never really your imperialist country either.
Hmm.
So, unlike, the countries I mentioned. So, when there was this insistence on growing Italian football through, be it
Yeah.
political means that Mussolini and a lot of people before that did, Italy became very intertwined with uh, their footballing image. Football
Hmm.
meant the world to them.
Wall to them.
And this is when, after the war, I'm probably like skipping forward a bit, right after the war, when Italy obviously didn't do well in the war, they had nothing really to
Yeah.
cling on to.
Yeah.
These players came in, and there was a time somewhere in the mid 1940s after the war
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
10 out of 11 Italian players from the Italian
Were
11 were
were
Torino
Torino.
players.
That's insane, Ajay bhai. Like
And
just to put it
वो
into
आजकल नहीं देखते हम लोग. We don't see that.
yeah.
Like, you can like come up with anything you want.
Yeah.
Even if we look at the great Brazilian sides, you never really saw a domination. एक style था, players of a certain ilk, like these
Yeah.
technical players, but
Yeah.
you never really see a particular club dominating. Abhi, if you associate two clubs with the England team, well, United and Tottenham, you never really saw
Yeah.
something like this for England either, or
I
any
agree.
other country. This was
I agree.
so rare that uh, the Grande Torino team, as it became known to be,
Hmm.
became a very household name in Italy because of what they were doing, the way they played football, and
Hmm.
a lot of times their story as well.
Yeah.
Because as we mentioned, many players didn't really do well before they came to Torino.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was becoming a very important part of Italy's identity
Yeah.
after the war.
Even
It was giving Italy hope in a way.
I agree. Yeah. Before we come more of that with you again, I wanted to ask Ajay bhai because Ajay bhai, मतलब this is where they start their dominance and immediately the war intensifies and then again for
Yeah.
2 साल के लिए लीग होता नहीं है मतलब partially होता है which I'll give the details very quickly. But then how difficult is it Ajay bhai to bounce back and dominate right away यार मतलब it can ruin the foundations,
Absolutely.
right? Is your thoughts
Absolutely.
on that because these guys just started it and then the war hits. What do you make of the what do you make of that?
सबसे पहले जो तू टोरिनो ब्लॉग बोल रहा था,
हाँ.
this wasn't a Torino block. The Azzurri were Il Grande Torino.
War Torino.
Yeah,
There was
exactly. Azzurri.
there was no block of players. It was literally the entire team. So it is extremely difficult. Like Kaustubh mentioned at the top, matlab, those are the times that we don't know. I mean, we did not know. We have not lived through that patch, but one can obviously empathize. And after reading and going through history, like we have um, very difficult times. Forget about sport at that time. Humanity is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
topmost concern. And obviously,
yeah,
we have seen glimpses in our time as well with a lot of ongoing wars. I mean, just मेरे को एक off the bat मेरे को example याद आ रहा है, Iraq's Asian Cup win.
Yeah,
You know,
Hmm.
those players, what they went through was something immense. So at that time, it was a very different era, right? Pre
yeah,
so many inventions, so many innovations. Um, it must have been so difficult at a human level to
yeah,
comprehend what each and every human went through. I mean, salute. I mean, the only word that comes to mind is
yeah,
immense respect and
yeah,
a very tremendous salute for what they went through and what they went on to achieve later
yeah,
on post the war.
Hmm. And
yeah. And you
also,
said,
it's like
Kabul.
one background is very important because during the war, a lot of Torino players
Yeah,
considered
I was,
quitting football.
yeah, I was going
Yes,
to come to that. Yeah,
yes,
They thought
I'll just give it for
there
one
is no
second,
point
cause
anymore.
yeah, I'll come to that in 1 second because I just wanted to correct myself. Of course, I mentioned I think Ferraris and Borrell as being the players chased by Juve, but actually it was Ezio, Loic and Mazzola who Juve wanted. Bigger stars,
ah,
of course, जो जिन्होंने टोरिनो की डायनेस्टी बनाई, सॉलिडिफाई की. But again, Ferruccio Novo was a crafty man. He made sure they would come to Torino instead of Juve. Just imagine those times. Now, I really wish there was a way to go back and watch all this, but of course there is none. I'm just glad people have written about it, people like Kostub and other journalists, so so that we can read and bring it to you guys. But moving on, Kostub, just to go to the next slide, Ajay bhai, the war period, and to what Kostub said, and I'll come to him only first. Because Kostub, you rightly said post-war they considered quitting football of a lot of these players, because जैसे तूने बोला कि बहुत, जैसे अजय भाई also said, a lot of damages, people went through a lot, travel routes were disrupted, moving to different clubs itself was hard for players. And actually, to what you said, these players were also could have been called up for war, but
Yeah,
smartly Ferruccio Novo, I think, just to briefly touch on it, he got them somehow working with Fiat. The Torino and UA worked
yeah,
together, and the players were indirectly part of an industry working towards the war, so they didn't have to go to the battlefield. And Mussolini
yeah,
himself at that time said they needed them more on the pitch and in other areas rather than on the field. So that was before it intensified, but when it intensified, Ferruccio Novo was very smart. उनको फियाट वियाट में करवा के, they even had pictures taken working with cars and everything to prove, yeah, these guys are actually doing work in other fields contributing to the war. So luckily, to what Kostub and Ajay bhai said, that dynasty, that core was, Ajay bhai, to your point, was retained. Nobody had to go on the battlefield, they were safe. But Kostub, in general, just to touch upon this period very briefly, क्योंकि 2 साल का गैप होता है लीग में, initially there is a format change, they try everything, but it's not possible. And this story maybe we can cover some other day, but Spezia had actually won the Scudetto in that period, which there's a different story which maybe we'll cover in a different video. Very interesting story. But Kostub, just tell us the brief, the 2 years the league halts. I spoke to Ajay about how difficult it is to bounce back, but then it resumes post-war. Il Grande Torino in the 45-46 season, it resumes very late, with the league being divided into north and south region-wise, because obviously routes are disrupted. तूने जैसे बोला, Italy is in a bad place. Luigi Ferrero, former player, is hired as the manager, but Torinos do not start the campaign well. They lose the Derby della Mole, but उसके बाद again they go on a tear. 2 गेम में 11 गोल, अगले 2 गेम में 11 गोल. Just your thoughts on that season, how they bounce back. Gabetto taking over as the star man over Mazzola. क्या लगता है तुझे?
from what I've read, there
Yeah.
were also times when they casually scored 9 or 10 goals
Yes.
in a game, which is unheard of because you look at, like, not to compare tragedy to tragedy, but the Busby
Yeah.
Babes at, I mean, years after, they were a dominant side as well, and
Hmm.
they won a game 9-1, I think,
Hmm.
which is again a very dominant thing to do,
Hmm.
and it shows that maybe if things had gone right, um, things could have been so different. Like history could have been completely different than how it is now. We'll look at the aftermath of everything later on soon enough. But yeah,
Hmm.
they were the thing in Italy, and हमने बात करी कि a lot of players didn't really take part in the war directly, but again, Mazzola was someone, specifically Mazzola. He started pursuing education,
Hmm.
thinking that he'll never go back to playing football again, and he'll
Yeah.
have to do something completely different. And
Hmm.
there were uncertainties about uh, how other players would return to action, but Novo made sure they stuck together, and that's like a major thing to do after the war. And I
Yeah,
guess a lot of it comes down to how he was a bit of a disciplinarian himself.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Despite being, as we mentioned, very innovative in his approach of how to run the club, he somehow made sure that they stuck together, and a very similar team
Mm,
came out of the other side of the war,
mm,
and they played
mm.
together. As I mentioned, they destroyed teams so
Yeah,
casually. And
yeah.
I guess it was 1947 when 11
You,
of the 10
yes,
players were
47. 10, yeah,
Torino
exactly.
players, and I think one
Yeah.
was a Juventus player. It was probably
One
a
was a UA
goalkeeper, if
player.
I'm
So,
not
matlab,
wrong.
Turin,
So
yeah,
it
yeah.
was all Turin.
It
It
was
All
all
was,
during,
during.
all during.
All during. So
and
one thing I would like to say, Costo, before we continue, is that एक तो इसमें यही वो सीजन है जैसे आप पीपीटी में देख सकते हो, अजय में भी देख सकते हैं कि वेदर डिमोलिश्ड रोमा, मतलब भाई फर्स्ट हाफ में 30 मिनट में 6 गोल मारे, फुल टाइम तक तो 7 गोल का विक्ट्री था, एंड देन
Correct.
दे डिमोलिश Napoli, Livorno, but they still had to win the Scudetto on the last day. Juve was right there, breathing down their necks. And I mean, Gabetto was a star they took from Juve and they made him their own star man. Matlab, what a different time to be, experiencing again a quite dominant side post और जैसे तो बोला bouncing back. Full credit आसान नहीं होता है. In those economic circumstances where people are personally going through so much. But if you go to the next slide, just continuing and moving through, Ajay bhai, we are closing in, of course, on an unfortunate thing which we will be talking about soon. But Ajay bhai, coming to you, the dominance continues post war, right? 46 to 48, Erbstein वापस आ जाता है, जिसके बारे में हमने बात की. This is one of the pictures which I wanted to show. He was the coach that got them second place before Novo took over. He comes this time as a technical director. Ajay bhai, 46-47 season में they smash records. मतलब SerieA returns to the regular format. You have 20 teams, I think, if I'm not wrong, Kostub, at the time. Legendary Romeo Menti comes back to the club, and Torino again, yaar. मतलब Ajay bhai, you look at the records here. Your thoughts on it? मतलब initially shaky start, but game week 21 say top of the SerieA, unbeaten 16 match run, 104 goals with Mazzola as the top scorer. Your 104 goals.
And they say Serie A is a defensive, boring league.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Like now, imagine, just crazy, yaar. Ajay bhai, your thoughts on it?
No, absolutely insane. I mean, these kind of numbers and this domination was
Hmm.
never to be seen again. I mean,
Yeah,
the magnitude of it, I don't think so. We can fully grasp. Forget us.
yeah,
I think the people who work in Italian football, even now,
yeah,
the likes of
yeah,
James Horncastle, हो, James
yeah.
Richardson, हो, जो सेरिया को इतना intensively cover किया है उन्होंने इतने सालों के लिए. I don't
Hmm.
think so. Even they can fully grasp at what the folk were witnessing back in the day. It was just sheer dominance, and of
Yeah,
course, Epstein's story is also very tragic. The way that he
yeah.
escaped so many camps and came back.
Hmm.
Almost, I mean, it is like that. एक second life बोलते हैं ना.
Yeah,
काफी लोगों
second
को
leg.
वो opportunity मिला था, and they
Yeah,
stamped their authority on it. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
Il Grande Torino, like the Grand Torino, is not lightly said. They deserve
Rightly
that
said.
title, and
Yeah,
it's all there. जो तेरे PPT में it's all there. It just
yeah,
kind of proves why they were the best team of that
yeah.
era.
Yeah, and you said it so well. Like a second chance at life, because he was sent to a concentration camp after he initially
Yeah,
left in Hungary. He was about to be sent to Auschwitz, but he luckily escaped. I think he was with Bela Gutmann when he escaped. So
yeah,
another legendary
I was
name.
going to mention.
Yeah,
He was
and yeah,
he wasn't there. He had a friend
yeah,
who
okay.
helped them escape, and
Uh,
he was in the
that
same camp as Bella Goodman. And the way life works, no
uh,
one really knew who's going to turn out to be what, and
yeah, yeah,
that Bella Goodman will turn out to be. We mentioned Bella Goodman in our Maldini podcast because he was
yeah.
manager when Milan won their first
Mm,
ever Champions League trophy, and it
mm,
was the first time an Italian club won a trophy. But at the
mm,
same time, Torino could have won that
mm.
if not for the disaster that we'll mention. But I think Epstein's story deserves to be told so many times.
In its own self, by the way, I would say that's like a whole different video together, because here we are covering so many things today, Kaustubh. I fully agree with you. I mean, there is so much to talk about him. I want to come to you again with the Superga disaster. Let me just touch upon the 47 48 season very quickly. Again, Ajay bhai, records continue to be smashed, even better than the previous season. Most points in the table, of course, 65 points in 40 games. Maximum advantage over second place, 16 points over AC Milan, UN Tristina, another club which we do not see in the echelons of Italian football anymore. Big 10-0 win against over Alessandria, and I think it's still the highest scoring win in Italian football. I think so, at least in the league. 29 out of 40 wins, longest unbeaten run, again 21 games, 19 out of 20 wins at home. Now the record even increases. Ajay bhai, 125 goals scored and only 33 conceded. मतलब वो goal difference आप सोचो यार, that's just insane. एंड दिस इज नॉट लाइटली, जैसे अजय भाई बोल रहे थे ना, आपको ये लगता होगा बहुत उस टाइम पे आसान था, उस टाइम पे भी इनोवेशंस करना फुटबॉल में वाज वेरी डिफिकल्ट. इट वाज नॉट अ 10 टीम लीग, इट वाज अ 10 प्लस टीम लीग, एज आई सेड. इट वाज अ 20 टीम लीग, एंड टू डू दिस वीक इन वीक आउट वाज नॉट इजी. अजय भाई, आपने बोला other teams used to want to play Torino from Europe, because at the time obviously we did not have as many European competitions,
Yeah.
obviously none pretty much. So people
Right.
wanted to play this team. They were like, Il Grande Torino Haircon we are hearing about, right? And they
Yeah.
wanted to play
Yeah.
this team. And just before we move on to unfortunate set of circumstances, I want to mention, even after the war, Ferruccio Novo was so calculated. He realized the climate कि हमें ज़्यादा पैसा नहीं ले सकता. So he spent smart, as Kostub said. We will mention these players. He signed one of the best goalkeepers, Valerio Bacigalupo. He signed I think Ballarin also, right, Kostub, around that time. Matlab, he signed all these iconic players, or players that ended up being iconic in that formation we showed. Grezar, Rigamonti, we will talk about all these players. So just to put a context, Torino continued to be that club in Italy that people wanted to go to. That was the best run club. Everything was perfect about them. We move on from here, Ajay bhai.
One
To
curious detail, which probably isn't mentioned anywhere, I don't think you'll find it because this was told to me by the person who wrote a book about the Superga disaster. I was speaking to him, and what he told me was that in 1947 or 48, I'm not sure which year exactly, the Torino team toured Brazil.
Yeah, they
And
did.
1950,
Brazil World
the
Cup.
World Cup took place in Brazil.
Yes, yes.
So he knew, Novo probably knew that this is going to be the backbone of the Italian national side. So he went to
Yes.
Brazil to assess
Yeah.
the conditions, the weather, the altitude, because altitude is a thing in South America, and how the
Yeah.
players can adapt. They had some these friendlies to make sure
Yeah.
that the players get used to it way before any other
I agree.
national team or any other club could. And that was we speak of these of in the 70s and 80s, Diego Maradona visiting Paris, and
Yeah.
it was his first time in Paris.
Yeah.
At that point, tours like this were very, very rare,
Yeah.
and
I
for
agree.
him to do that says everything you want to know. That this man didn't just care about the club; he also recognized that this is going to be Italy. This is not
Yeah.
just Torino. This is Italy, and we need to make them prepared for what's to come. Not just
I agree.
your league dominating leagues. This is about
Yeah.
world domination. He probably realized that.
Yeah, and that's very well said. Matlab, they were ahead of the curve, as they say these days. मतलब जैसे तूने बोला,
Yeah.
everything they had their eye on, they were the best. We'll move on now. They also, I want to mention, they signed another good player, which we'll be talking about, called Eusebio Castigliano, another big player. I'll mention some stories later. But Ajay bhai, we come to the unfortunate set of circumstances.
Yeah.
And again, I ask the audience, I know no one in the audience is like this, but I ask the audience to show the utmost level of respect. Please keep it contextual. Please do not disrespect anything related to this video, because Ajay bhai, in 48-49, again Torino retains most of its core players, only a few changes. Matlab, few being some players, of course they add some good players here and there, like Julius Schubert and Dino Ballarin, as well as I think the brother of Aldo Ballarin, right, Kosovo, if I'm not wrong.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what a injury ridden season होता है जब है, मतलब star players like Menti, Castigliano, Sauro, Tomà, Costo will speak about him. They keep getting injured, but despite that, Ajay bhai, they beat Juventus. They start the season strong, and towards the end of the season, they play Inter. They play a draw at the San Siro, 4 points clear of Inter with I think 3 or 4 games to go, Ajay bhai, and then sad set of circumstances. Unveil, Ajay bhai, if you want to take over, matlab, if you want to go through this, because when I was doing my research, I said this to Kaustubh that when you read about such stories, you know, but when you do research in depth, right, you actually get goosebumps, and you feel the severity
Yeah.
of it. Matlab, I was still like shook at the time when I was doing my research. Ki, yaar, this it really gets to you, Ajay bhai. But if you want to take over, uh,
No, absolutely. I'm getting goosebumps right now, and this is probably one of my initial, when I started following SerieA Calcio, one of the initial articles that I read, and it popped up. So I know कि back then aviation is not what it is right now, and I remember reading about a thick fog in Turin,
hmm,
and this is so unfortunate, as Costa mentioned, that there are parallels between Man United and the Munich disaster,
hmm,
along with Superga. And when such an incident happens, it happened with Chapecoense also in the
yeah, Chape,
recent times, the Brazilian team. Tha. It just sends shivers, because at the end of the day, I mean, we are football fans, but
yeah,
we are humans as well.
yeah,
And this was a human tragedy. It happened to one of the most talented teams in the world back then,
you know
who
what,
were dominating the sport, like
yeah.
what we've been discussing for over 30 minutes,
Hmm.
and everyone perished. I mean, it is so unfortunate that ये ऐसा एक इंसिडेंट हुआ जिससे एक क्लब के पूरे forget the history, like, going ahead, everything was affected, and the families of the players, of the technical
Yeah.
team who were also there, no one, the pilots, everyone perished in this crash. And probably one of the most saddest incidents in world football of all
Yeah.
time. It's really sad.
It
And
is
like you
really,
mentioned,
yeah.
yeah, like you
It is.
mentioned in this,
Sorry, go ahead. My bad.
so like you mentioned, यहाँ पे, it landed in Barcelona.
Yeah.
They were coming back after playing a game against Benfica, and
Hmm.
the players boarded the plane at 2:50. Aircraft took off at Turin, and like I mentioned, यहाँ पे
Hmm.
कि the weather was poor. There was a lot of fog over there, and
Hmm.
at 5:03 p.m. the plane crashed near the Basilica of Superga, which is
Hmm.
why it is
Hmm.
known as a Superga
Yeah.
disaster.
And just one thing I would like to add before you continue, right? Like these time frames I've added, this is proper research done, so don't worry about that. One thing is that. Second thing is, they were going in good spirits to Benfica. Ki, even if they lost to Benfica, it was a farewell match for the Benfica
Yeah,
captain, right, Francisco Ferreiro. They lost the game. They were back in good spirits. They actually halted in Barcelona to have lunch with Milan when their plane was AC Milan, who was on their way to face Real Madrid at the time. And sub अच्छा चल रहा था. They got onto their plane, and then unfortunately, as you said, the course they took was over Savona, and they were about to land Ajaba in 30 minutes. It was not even that long. And the strong gust,
yes,
the visibility, the altimeter which went faulty, actually, apparently, it is believed that the altimeter showed them that they were at a much higher level than they actually were. That malfunctioned the visibility. And then what happened is that because they were at the speed of 110 miles per hour, so when the pilot actually saw the Basilica of Superga, I have put a picture later, it came right in front of it for him to do anything about it, like them
yeah,
suddenly, right? So it is just sad. And yeah, I mean, if we could just go to the next slide and show the image. So this is the
yeah,
Basilica of Superga Costo. Matlab, it's outside the city of Turin. It's on a hill, and as you can see, the circle over there, that's approximately the embankment at the back, I think, where the plane would have crashed, or is estimated to have crashed, which is sad. And Ajay bhai, just to go to the next slide, uh, there were 31 victims, Ajay bhai, matlab no survivor, very matlab players, coaching staff, journalists, just terrible. Just even reading and just seeing the picture, Ajay bhai, it feels gut wrenching, heart wrenching. You lost such, matlab everybody, as you said, human lives matter, but also from the Torino context, the people that built their team, Bachiga Lupo, Leslie Lievesley, Mazzola, Menti, just to name a few, Grezar, everyone gone just like that. Just sad to see. And journalists, founder of Tutto Sport,
yeah.
coaching staff, club officials, just terrible. We can go on and discuss this further, Ajay. Just and कौस्तुभ, I'll come to you with the aftermath and Ajay bhai as well. Like कौस्तुभ, तू साउरो टोमा की अगर थोड़ी मतलब at the time a few of them were मतलब could not make the trip because they were injured or for other reasons. Sauro Toma, I think Dino Ballarin, Aldo's brother, Renato Gandolfi, and I think even Valentino Mazzola was supposed Not Mazzola, sorry, my bad. Even Vittorio Pozzo was supposed to
Vittorio
travel, but yeah, he could not travel. Ferruccio Novo fell sick. He also missed the trip. Otherwise, of course, he survived as well, as a reason, as I've mentioned. And Tomà, I will pull up your article, Ajay, bhai, just for a bit. He was heartbroken. He said, I was condemned to survive while my brothers perished. And how, Ajay, bhai, if you want to just sum up how the season ended, the 48-49 season, before we go to Kostov's articles.
No, I think this is the league came together, all the teams came together, and Torino were given the Scudetto.
Hmm.
And I think that is what matters in the grand scheme of things, right?
Hmm.
In the grand scheme of things, that is what
Yeah,
matters.
yeah.
Um, this was a human, I mean, this was a tragedy that was beyond comprehension. So
Hmm.
I'm quite, I don't know, I'm not summing, I'm not getting the words because just
Yeah,
reading through this and chatting just makes one so
yeah, makes it.
emotional. But I think
Yeah, it is.
the league did the
I
right
fully
thing
agree
and
with you.
got that to
To
and
Torino.
I think all the teams fielded youth teams to
You
face
teams, yes.
whoever was left as well. So compassion
Yes.
and empathy was eventually the name of the
Hmm.
game, and that was beautiful to see.
Yeah, I agree with you. Costo, I'll come to your articles. I think we should go through the PPT first because these stories, we will be talking about the
Yeah,
stories. But I agree with Ajay Bhai ki Sauro, like they got the Scudetto, everyone fielded the U teams. There was a good level of respect. And the following season, actually, each team had to give Torino one of their players as a donation, which is a great gesture as well. I like. But Ajay Bhai, it did leave a scar, right? We will be getting into that. But because of that, the Italy team refused to travel. They had doubts about traveling via air for the 1950
yeah,
World Cup. They traveled by ship and they had to, I think, make a journey of like 20 days. And by the time they
yeah,
reached the World Cup, they were jaded. The performance, I think, was not good as well. And they had to play a more defensive game as a result. जो Torino का जो game था, right, which we spoke of so highly, it was not overly defensive and anything. There's nothing wrong with defensive games, first of all, let me clarify. But because of their fatigue levels after that travel, they could not play their best game. And they, as you said, Ajay, bhai, they had lost the entire team,
yeah.
unfortunately, most of it.
This
So,
is a
and
this is a World Cup that Italy would have won for sure.
would have
There
exactly.
is
Yeah,
there
yeah,
is no two
yeah.
ways about it.
There is no two
1950
ways about
was
it.
Italy would
Yeah.
have won, and another fun fact is that the 1950 World Cup is where even India was invited to take part,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, yes.
and
And,
even
and Ajay, as
India
you
refused
said,
to travel.
yeah, and Ajay, as you said, the thing is, everything was lined up for them cohesion wise.
Yeah,
These guys knew each other. They were humble men. Costo shared an article with me. Why was this team loved so much? They were humble men. They were not aristocrats or anything. Some of the players had pubs in Turin, in the middle of the city. They used to hang out with the locals. They used to interact with the locals. They were the locals themselves. Like they were like the locals themselves, even if they were not from Turin. They used to treat everyone equally, right, Costo? And they had this bond. They were loved for a reason, not because they were stars, but because they were humble men doing great things. And then, as I've mentioned, Torino as a club never saw the same level of success. ठीक है 70s में एक I think Serie A title आया, one UEFA Cup final, but ever since then we know right after this they went to the Serie B as well, and we know where Torino is today. So moving on, Ajay bhai, just we when we I'll come to Costo with the articles, but yeah, as you can see, this was hard to get as well. A lot of these were stock images, कैसे तो मिल गया, but these were the days from the funeral. Very sad scenes, as you can see. 500,000 people, Costo and Ajay had like more than 500,000 people had gathered, and it was quite obviously a sad sight because look at the numbers, just look at the scale, Ajay bhai. Look at this, shows you how much they were loved. That those photos in itself. And Ajay bhai, this annual sorry, yeah, we can just briefly on this, yeah. The annual commemoration इससे उसके बाद से हर साल में सुबेरगा डिजास्टर 4 मई को हुआ था 1949 में, हर साल से कोमेमोरेट किया जाता है. इस साल 4 मई वाज द 75th एनिवर्सरी, जहां आप देख सकते हो बॉटम राइट पे अलेसांद्रो बुंजोर्नो, who is at Napoli now, who was the Torino captain at the time. I'll try to pull up a video. As you can see, Ajay, if you want to take over, what happens exactly on the day of the funeral, how the tribute works, if you just want to take over.
no, I see. So even I'm happy that every year even SerieA pays homage to
Yeah.
this because this affected the entire country, the entire league, right? So um, up there are tragedies that have happened in world football with other clubs, like we spoke about Man United, of course
Hmm.
Liverpool also, and
Hmm.
I'm happy that every year, people do take out their time and pay respect, pay homage
Hmm.
to what was a very unfortunate incident and Torino as a football club have kept the legacy alive. ये
Hmm.
मेरा एक ख्वाब है कि we as Calcio Charcha also
Yeah.
get to go
Yeah.
and visit and pay our respect to
Yeah.
one of the greatest sides of Italian football. And
Hmm.
this is what football culture is all about. I know कि rivalry है, titles
Hmm.
है, banter है, but off the pitch, this is
Yeah.
what makes football the beautiful game. So this is such,
Absolutely.
I mean, so heartwarming to see, and
Yeah.
I'm happy that this will continue on forever.
Yeah, that was very well said. And just to add, कि लोग gather करते हैं इस दिन पे, they commemorate, they go to the memorial. I think it's in Superga itself, right, Kostub, if I'm not wrong.
It is, it is,
And
it is.
the captain at the time reads out the names of all the victims. I will be showing the video with honor, and it gives a sense of pride. And when you watch that video, you actually get chills. I personally, like, when you feel it, when Bungiorno was reading the names, especially. And as you can see, remains of the aircraft are there, including a propeller, a tire, scattered pieces of fuselage, personal bags of Mazzola, Marozzo, Erbstein. Museo del Grande Torino della Leggenda Granata is located as well, where they have, where they do the anniversary of the tragedy. And जैसे बोला था 18 players थे, बाकी सब staff था, and their remains are buried at the Cimitero Monumentale of Turin. And actually, at the time when the plane crashed, sorry, I forgot to mention this, it was hard for them because Vittorio Pozzo, Ajay Bhai, and Kostub was actually called to identify the remains, which was difficult because my article Kostub ने जो भेजा पढ़ा, मतलब there were remains जिनके limbs नहीं थे. It was very disturbing to read. मतलब it was very hard for them on a whole. And we'll move on from this annual commemoration. I have a few pictures for the audience. Yeah, again, another picture, a bit more of a close up of the annual commemoration. If we could go to the next slide. Again, as we keep saying, Il Grande Torino, I think Ajay Bhai, they became legends. They were already legends, but they became, this solidified how they loved they were. As you can see, Torino mein, I'm sorry, I do not know what that structure is called. With all, like, I don't want to sound ignorant, but that is lit up in Torino colors as well. You have the have a Torino representative waving the Granata flag. If we could go to the next slide as well, Ajay bhai. And this is the book Costo was talking about. Roberto Penino करके author है, जिसका फोटो थोड़ी देर पहले मैंने दिखाया था. Sorry, I will be showing, my bad. Immortal Torino करके बुक लिखी है. अगर आप खरीदना चाह सकते हैं, I'm sure it's still available. Go buy it if you are interested in reading about this. He spoke to Sauro Tomà, who did not end up being on the flight. He has actually interacted with Kostov, and just to mention, he has sent Kostov a ticket of that flight, but we won't be showing it obviously because it does not feel right. But we thought we'll mention it. But yeah, he has interacted with Kostov. He's not on social media, but yeah, a great book. So I would recommend people getting this. Ajay, if we could move on. So these are the key men. जैसे मैंने बोला था, Romeo Menti, one of the attackers, Andras Kutik, जिसको halfway through who had left Torino when they won their first Scudetto, Leslie Lievesley, the Englishman who I think was brought from Manchester United as Costo, if I'm not
I
wrong.
think he had a United background,
Yeah, he had a
but
Manchester United.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure if he came from there, but he had that
Yeah, something
background.
like that. So he was one of the brainchilds of this team. Valentino Mazzola, Ajay bhai, Sandro Mazzola, जो है आज Inter legend, उनके dad and Sandro Mazzola also. Ajay Costo has covered in an article he was quite sad after his father passed away. We will be looking at that very briefly. Ajay bhai, if you could just keep going and then I'll pull up Kostov's articles. Guglielmo Gabetto signed from UA, went on to become a Torino legend. Luigi Ferrero, जिसने coach किया, right, Kostov team को, and still made them dominant. Sauro Tomà, who missed the flight, and Roberto Panino on the right, as you can see, the author who wrote the book. Mario Rigamonti ended up becoming a top defender as well. As Kostub said, all these names reached world class level after joining Torino. Last two slides, I think. Valerio Bacigalupo, जो goalkeeper sign किया था, again Ezio Loic, जो Venezia से sign किया था, Franco Osola, Ferruccio Novo's first signing, Ajay bhai, the mother I mentioned, ended up becoming a top player. And this is aura. Like, for me, this is aura, by the way. That hairstyle, that classic, the rolled jerseys, this is aura, man. This is aura. But they were great. They were just great. I wish we could have watched them by any means possible. Mario Sperone, जिसके बारे में मैंने बोला था, the World Cup winner they had signed. I think there is one more slide, and then that's the best. Look, I didn't want to include all names because otherwise this would have gone too long. Virgilio Marozzo, Aldo Ballarin ended up becoming a top defender. Giuseppe Grezar and Eusebio Castigliano, who ended up becoming a top midfielder and scored, I think, a top goal against Bologna to clinch a Scudetto for Torino. So this was our tribute, at least from the this is what we could present to you in our PPT. I just want to show one thing before we go to Kostub's article very quickly. I hope the sound plays. Otherwise, maybe I'll ask Ajay Bhai to share this. Certain bookmarks I've saved. This year, Belotti, I hope this is visible, went to the memorial and paid his tribute, which was good to see, Ajay Bhai, of course.
Yeah, of
This
course.
this is this audible?
No, it's not audible.
Not
It's not
audible.
audible. Not audible. Could you play it, Ajay, from your end if I was to share this with you very
Share
quickly?
it. Share
Yeah,
it.
just give me 1 second. But yeah, that there were other players paying tribute as well. You had like you saw Belotti, he's still attached to the club. So we'll be just looking at this briefly and closing this tribute. Ajay, I've shared it. If you could just quickly.
Will do. Will do.
Yeah, we don't mean to rush. By the way, the recording has a bit of a limitation, so don't get us wrong. We'll be very upfront with this. So Ajay, will play this video. We'll go to Costume's article and then, yeah,
This is Alessandro Bongiorno,
buongiorno.
and I think this is from the last
So
season.
yeah, matlab last season 23-24 4th May,
बिल्कुल,
when he was the captain, of course.
बिल्कुल.
I campioni d'Italia, Macigalupo, Ballarin Aldo, Ballarin Dino, Bongiorni, Castigliano, Fadini, Gabetto, Grava, Grezar, Loic, Maroso, Martelli, il nostro capitano Valentino Mazzola, Menti, Operto, Ossola, Rigamonti, Schubert, dirigenti e tecnici, Civalleri, Egri Erbstein, Lievesley, Agnisetta, Cortina, giornalisti, Casalbore, Cavallero, Tosatti, equipaggio, Meroni, Dinca, Bianciardi, Pangrazzi, Bonaiuti.
What a guy, Bongiorno.
Yeah, man, that buongiorno, and he's हमने discuss किया he's तो पूरा Torino fan. He's a full-fledged Torino fan since childhood, and that was chilling to see Ajay and Costo. मतलब again, it still gives you goosebumps, like the way he reads it out, and this is one of the things they do. I'll, I mean, I hope people saw that and understood the severity of the thing, and I'll pull up Kostub's articles before we close this very soon. Just 1 second, just give me a second. Because Kostub has written a wonderful piece from Sauro Tomà's perspective, who survived the Superga disaster by, of course, not being able to. I mean, he was injured at the time. So, Kostub, just tell us, sorry, Sauro Tomà's, my bad, Sauro Tomà's story. What exactly happened? Why he, said what he said about him feeling condemned, to survive.
So I think to put it out there, I think it's always when disasters like these take place, any disaster for that matter. I think it's more about the personal stories as well, where you can just get into the real details of the story and how it impacted you, because that's what leaves these long lasting impacts, because that's a very human thing. And I spoke to Bill as well,
Yeah.
who lost his father in the disaster, and he's obviously English. But I think Roberto Benigno's book, which I read parts of it, because he sent some parts of it over to me, it looks at Sauro Tomà from the perspective of someone who uh, speaks of it in a way that although Sauro Tomà is not with us anymore, he passed away some years ago. He speaks from a very a bit of a survival's guilt, I guess, which is when something like that happens, you just feel hopeless a lot of times, and that's what happened in that case because he didn't make the plane because he had a meniscus injury that kept him out
Mm. Mm.
of the game. He wasn't really a regular; he was more of a squad player. So he
Mm.
picked up that injury, stayed at home, and once he returned home on the evening of the disaster, he was surprised that people around him were sort of embracing him, sort of creating this huddle around him, saying that they were glad he was alive, which left him
Mm.
confused. And at the
Yeah.
same time, I spoke to Bill about it as well. So Bill
Yeah.
remembers the day when this happened. Although, again, this is like he was very young. He was probably not even 10.
Yeah.
So his
Yeah.
memory is a bit faded because he's now in
Yeah.
his 80s. He's 85 or something like that. So it
Yeah.
impacted him and continues to impact him, and it just changed his life that very day.
Mm.
So he remembers that day sort of vividly. He told me that it was a very dark day in terms of like it was pretty
Mm.
overcast. And back then there was no television that we have these days where you get this constant flow of information. You had to
Mm.
rely on radio and on
Mm.
the newspaper, which came out on the next day. But he was like hanging about outside his place, and they lived in
Yeah.
Italy, obviously in Turin. Um, that's when his mother started
Yeah.
opened up the radio, and that's when they heard about it. He didn't
Yeah.
really like grasp what happened at that time because you don't really expect a kid who's not even 10 to
Mm.
understand what it really happened, to understand the idea of death or losing someone, let alone a parent. So
Mm.
it was a very dark day. And obviously, we know that there was a storm or a very uh, gusty atmosphere
Mm.
around the basilica as well, which is why the
Yeah.
crash took place. And Sauro Tomà went there um, after he heard of what had happened. I think he heard of it through the radio and from the people around as well. And he
Mm.
told a lot of people in the streets that something had happened
Mm.
after learning it from the people themselves. And he initially, what I was told is he initially didn't really want to go
Mm.
because it was probably too much for him. But
Yeah.
a friend of his, convinced him to go along. Vittorio Pozzo was obviously already there. He was the one who had
Mm.
to assess the situation. And after that, I guess I would rather put it in Bill's perspective because it
Mm.
changed his life. What he
Yeah.
told me is that uh, he really enjoyed living in Italy.
Yeah,
Uh,
just one thing before you, for the audience, I just want to clarify. Bill Lievesley was the son of Leslie Lievesley, जो Torino का, of course, at the time, you know, sort of administrator, coach type role में था, right? Just to clarify that, yeah, take over. And he's, I think,
so
still alive, right? Because you spoke to him, and he's
yeah,
still,
Bill is still very much alive. He's a very good person, a really warm person. He's very approachable in a way. He speaks about his
yeah,
experiences really well.
yeah,
As much as he can remember, obviously,
mm,
because a lot of it is blurry for him. Because does tell me that when he was quite young,
mm,
he knew a lot of players. He spoke to a lot of players, and he had these kickabouts with Sandro Mazzola when he was, I guess, 2 years older. Sandro was like
mm,
2 years older to Bill, so they played
yeah,
together as well. But obviously,
mm,
Bill mentioned that Sandro was like well,
yeah,
as we say, clear of him as a player. He was,
yeah,
he obviously had those
yeah,
Valentino Mazzola genes in him.
mm,
And Bill was actually a translator of sorts because
mm,
his father, Leslie, didn't really know Italian at a point, and
mm,
he was really good at the education part, and he picked up Italian really well. So he was a, communicator between Leslie Lievesley, his father, and the rest of the squad. And they were
mm,
very approachable to him, and he remembers that. He still knows Italian, by the way, because he stayed there for many years. But he did mention to me that he didn't really like leaving Italy, and
yeah,
that's how his life just changed because his
yeah,
father was part of the war in some way.
yeah, yeah,
He played a role in. I'm not sure if it was the British Army or the Italian Army, but he
mm,
was a very Leslie Levesley was someone who hated the idea of technology because I remember
mm,
him telling me a story that this is towards the end of that season,
mhm.
probably days before the disaster took place. Um, they were taking on Juventus, and interestingly enough, a detail that's not mentioned is that Leslie
Yeah,
Levesley was about to join Juventus
join
at the end of the
Juventus.
season.
Yeah.
I didn't know that before Bill actually informed me that he had the option to go to Marseille. I think. I
Yeah.
mean, Bill told me that he couldn't really recall the club, but when I told him that it was it Marseille, he's like, yeah, it was Marseille. He couldn't really recall the name because it's again a blurry memory for him. Um, he was about to join Juve, and there was a Torino Juve game, which I think Torino
Yeah.
won well. I think I mentioned that in the article as well. So he mentions that Torino when they somehow got into a car which his father didn't really like.
Yeah.
As soon as they were leaving the stadium, uh, a lot of Juventus fans somehow got to know
Yes.
that
Yeah.
his father is about to join Juve, and you don't
Mm.
really see that these days. They sort of huddled around the car and started chanting his name and started celebrating. So it says a lot about the connection these people who perished in the crash had with
Mm.
the local people, and I think I mentioned it as well that
Mm.
it was a very human connection. It was not the sort of connection
Yes.
we have with players, not over
Mm.
social media or
Mm.
you know all that. I would say
Yes.
superficial stuff that if we compare it to how things were, they were like real people who were actually connected to them, that spoke to them, and they uh, and he remembers a lot of it. As I mentioned, he recalls
Yeah.
Sandro Mazzola, and Roberto
Yeah.
also mentioned to me that Mazzola was very keen on making
Mm.
sure that like he was
Yeah.
impacted by the disaster, and
Yeah.
he was very keen on making sure that people knew that his father had a role to play in the disaster in that
Yeah.
excellent
Yeah.
Torino team. And
Yeah.
I think there's probably a picture of it somewhere in the article
Sure. Look
of,
for it.
of of the
Yeah.
younger Mazzola. So it's
Of the
it's
younger
it's like
Manzola or
the
huh.
people being impacted by it is what I learned because I wrote
Ah,
about
this is the one. Oh.
this one. So
Oof.
this is a very young Sandro Mazzola
Wow.
with his father.
Mm.
And this, I think, this picture was given to me by Roberto himself because he has a lot of stuff
Damn.
in his
Amazing.
arsenal these days. Because he also mentioned to me that there was sort of a bit of a store close to the
Mm.
current Torino
Mm.
home stadium where uh, they kept a lot of stuff in memory of the disaster. It's closed down
Yeah.
now. He spoke to the person who ran it, who unfortunately closed his business down. I don't really know the reason for it, but yeah, it's a very jarring thing because you speak to people who are directly impacted by the disaster. Like we can
Mm.
read stuff online, uh,
Yeah.
but at the end of it, I think even for the Munich air disaster, like I've written a lot about that as well.
Mm.
I
Yeah, I
think
know.
it just comes down to the people whose lives completely changed,
Changed.
apart from
And
the fact that the
yeah.
larger picture that we speak of. So yeah, that was
Mm.
a pretty moving experience, and I wrote about it, and I thought this is quite an achievement of sorts because
Yeah, I understand.
speaking to someone who was directly impacted by the disaster, it was
It's something,
so many stories, so
and
many
I can
stories.
just we
Half of
can
them he
only be
doesn't probably
grateful.
remember accurately, but
Yeah.
again, story is a story, and
We
it
can
was
only be
such a
grateful and
fascinating thing.
thankful to you, Ajay, like him, Ajay bhai, because sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Kaustuv, but I can only say that we are grateful and thankful that you covered this because this perspective, as you narrated, like either जो तू text में भी लिखा है, right, Ajay bhai, कि like how that UA game, UA fans got to know and then found out that their father was about to join them, and Bill obviously was impacted, as Kaustubh said, but eventually as time passed, he had to, as you had written in the article, right, that there was a sense of acceptance from Bill's part. But Sandro also, Sandro Mazzola, who became an icon, was deeply impacted because Bill used to kick the ball around with Sandro Mazzola, as you have mentioned,
Yeah.
when he was 9 and 10. And then obviously Mazzola, jaise tu bola, Costa was way better and he went on to become a footballing legend and Inter legend. And
I
Mazzola
think
was also.
I think if I remember right, he was persuaded by a lot of his immediate support, emotional support
Yeah,
system to not play for Torino. And
yeah,
hence he ended up joining Internazionale, if I'm
yeah,
not mistaken.
yeah.
Sandro
But
Mazzola.
या you're right. And वही है ना, अजय एंड कौस्तुभ, जिस इसने इतना अच्छे से लिखा है कि Penino spoke to him, and the story is encapsulated here. How they were affected, how lives were changed. Italy was not the same for a while. Italy का मतलब Italy, the Torino the Torino Italy, as I would say, मतलब made up of fully of Torino players. जैसे कॉस्टोम ने आर्टिकल में बोला है कि they were basically, I think, out there to change their image as well, right? Kostom, if you have mentioned
Hmm.
somewhere, the image of Italy was not generally good, but Torino playing the way they did, then that changed perceptions right away. And just again, these stories tell you, Ajay, by how much this team, the impact they had. Again, Penino says he's very emotional about it, and whenever something
Yeah.
about the disaster or father's legacy takes place, he wants to be involved. That is Sandro Mazzola, and that is how much he cares. And while the likes of Mazzola and Bill are still very much affected, the accident came at a crucial point. Sorry, this was the part. The reputation of iconic Il Toro side was playing a key role in molding the tag of Italy into a positive one with their style of football. And again, Europe used to associate that Torino with a great team, and unfortunately, what happened, as Ajay Bhai said, Azzurri was one of the favorites to win, or the probably the outright favorites to win the
Yeah, yeah.
1950 World Cup.
100% they would have won it.
Yeah.
100%.
And unfortunately, yeah, what happened was tragic. And जैसे Kostok ने बोला, they toured Brazil to assess the conditions and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, the last thing which happened last season was जो कॉस्टुब ने बोला कि बोलोनिया वर्सेस टोरिनो में ये स्पेशल जर्सी पहनी गई थी, as a remembrance, as a commemoration to that Il Grande Torino team. This was the jersey, and if I'm not wrong, I don't know what the text says. I'll try to remember it. But there is one more story before we close this off very briefly. Ki Torino has a friendship with one of the biggest clubs in the world, River Plate. After the disaster, River Plate decided to do charity games, right, Costo, in Italy, and help
Yeah.
them out and raise funds. The tickets were expensive, but the stadium was packed. They helped them a lot, and to this day, the two clubs have friendship. As you can see, River Plate ka ye season ka away kit is in the colors of Torino, and at times also Torino wear striped away jerseys as a commemoration to River Plate's home jersey. So that is good to see. Torino also have a friendship with Brazilian club Corinthians, who helped them out a lot as well. So that is one piece of story I wanted to say. I think we have pretty much covered everything. Didn't mean to rush it through, but we have very limited time on this. So I think, guys, is there anything else anyone wants to add about the Il Grande
No,
Torino or anything with
I
this?
think just going through this over the last few days, जब हम लोग discuss कर रहे थे, but when we started recording,
Yeah,
I'm still at a loss of words because it's such a tragic story that happened,
yeah,
and at a human level, this affects us who are
yeah,
thousands of miles away, who are not even part of that fabric of Italian
yeah,
society, but
yeah,
obviously we follow Italian calcio, and इतने सालों के बाद मतलब हम तो जिंदा भी नहीं थे उस वक्त, but it still affects all of us. It shows that football goes way beyond borders, languages, eras, and I'm sure that in a different multiverse, this disaster did not happen, and Torino went on to achieve big things, and Italy won the World Cup. That multiverse exists, but sadly we are not part of it. But I
yeah,
think from the little experience that all of us have, this is the least that we can do to commemorate such a
yeah.
legendary side, Il Grande Torino.
Yeah, and Costo, would you like to say anything?
No,
First of all, I just want to say thanks to you and for the work you do. I mean, ये सब stories you have
Even
written.
Mitul also
Mitul,
contributed
yes, yes,
to a lot
of
of
course, of course.
yes.
Yeah, I agree with you. Mitul, thanks for that River Plate friendship wala thing I got from Mitul's articles, but I thought for graphically showing it in a better way, I would use a bookmark, Twitter bookmark, right? But Mitul, thanks to you as well if you're watching. The Corinthians wala story, the generally your article was amazingly written as well. So thanks to him. Thanks for reminding me, Ajay bhai. And sorry, one more thing before Kostov goes ahead. ये जो jersey मैंने बताई, right, Ajay bhai, which was worn in Bologna, it says Solo il Fato Leave in say, which says that only fate beat you, if I'm not wrong, is the tag. So quite a deep meaning behind it. But yeah, Kostom, sorry, anything you would like to say?
no, I just hope that we did justice to everything that happened because, as someone who works in Italian football, I remember thinking a lot of times that, yeah, I've written a lot about, the Munich air disaster, obviously. But again, I thought there are things out there which deserve as much attention. And I just hope that we did sort of pay a sort of a tribute as well because a lot of it doesn't really get talked about. We've uncovered a lot of smaller details in the entire story, and I think Epstein's story is something which we'll probably cover
Yeah.
later, because what an icon he was.
Absolutely.
We've not touched upon it in too much detail, but what a story.
Yeah.
For those who are watching, they can actually go through parts of it, because
Yeah.
you realize that you don't really see stories
Yeah.
of that type, especially in football, uh, and how it was correlated to everything, the non-football stuff, a lot of the racial stuff, uh, the politics and everything. So this is it was a great thing to do, and I hope we did everything justice, the disaster, and the people who were like impacted by it.
Mm. Yeah, I very well said again. Matlab, I can only say that I hope we did full justice to this. We did it to the best extent of our possible. We also, of course, knew about the disaster, but as Ajay bhai and me discussed, and with Kaustubh as well, when you do research, it really hits you, and you know so many more
It
things.
hits you.
There are so many more stories. Like one of an
Yeah.
upcoming player by the name of Rubens Fadini, who was about to be the successor to Valentino Mazzola. His story was touching. We'll touch upon it some other day. He of course lost his life as well in the Superga disaster. So many things, and I was glad actually that I got I'm glad that we as a panel got to do this, because we want to bring
Yeah.
these stories to the community. We want to highlight what Calcio has to offer, and these stories to let you know that there are things outside of a certain league. There are things outside of a certain country. There are legacies outside of us, outside of few, 3-4 teams as well. And Torino was that club that embodied greatness. And as I said it in one of the slides, that Il Grande Torino will never be forgotten. They'll always be legends, and they created a legacy that will, make them a great club regardless of where they are in the present day. So I just want to thank Ajay bhai first of all for doing his bit as well,
Always.
contributing,
Always.
sharing information as usual, coming on this stream, helping us out. Also, obviously, thanks to Kaustubh for his works. Post, follow him on Twitter. He writes these kind of articles. He had, as I said, he had the chance to spill to Bill Lievesley, of course, Leslie's son. And of course, this is just feels a great opportunity to cover this. And thanks to everyone for watching. Please do watch this video with, maintain the utmost level of respect with the context. Leave your comments, let us know your thoughts, ask away questions. Do not feel
Bilkul.
you do not feel ashamed to ask any basic question regarding this topic as well. Please feel free to ask this, and please share this. We want this video to go out to as many people as possible. जिसने फुटबॉल आज तक देखा नहीं है उनको तुम ये स्टोरी भी दिखा सकते हो, बिकॉज इन
बिल्कुल.
जनरल इट्स
बिल्कुल.
अ रिवेटिंग स्पोर्ट्स स्टोरी, राइट अजय भाई? इट्स
Yeah.
समथिंग that anyone can connect with. So
and
please share this.
and like
Huh.
and like what I mentioned at the start, Param, ki we have so many young kids. Like I call them young because I feel I'm a millennial and
Yeah,
I'm in a different phase of life. But so many young kids who've gotten into football, who support the likes of, say, United, City, Barca, and this story. I hope ki aap log dekho, share karo, and you kind of acknowledge that this was a different era in history as well. So I
yeah,
hope that we've been able to do
yeah,
justice, like Kautup
yeah,
mentioned, and bring this story to all of you.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, very well, Ajay, said Ajay bhai, and thank you so much, everyone, for watching this. Please subscribe to the channel. Let us spread this video, and let us get more people to subscribe and watch these kind of videos. If you like this, we will get more kind of videos, more sort of these videos, maybe a different angle, more stories about the Superga, the victims of the Superga disaster. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you around the next time. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.